The morning sun bathes the churchyard in golden light, the kind that photographers dream of, casting a surreal glow over the white roses lacing the pews. Guests are dressed in their finest, chatter buzzing with warmth and joy as the ceremony unfolds like something from a fairy tale. Claire Anderson stands at the altar in her ivory gown, veil catching the soft breeze, her hands tightly gripping the bouquet of lilies. Outwardly, she is the portrait of a radiant bride, smiling with practiced grace at the man beside her. Yet behind the delicate curve of her lips, a quiet storm brews. As she looks at David Carter, tall, charming, the man everyone praises for his charisma, her eyes falter for just a second. It is not the kind of nervous flutter that brides often feel, but a sharper sensation, a weight pressing into her chest. A single thought pricks at her, sudden and uninvited. Do I really know the man I'm about to marry? The whisper of her inner voice feels louder than the priest's words. Sometimes, the people we trust most are the ones we know the least. It unsettles her, but she pushes it down, clinging to the perfect image unfolding around her. Cameras flash, guests sigh happily, and Claire forces her smile, willing herself to believe that what she feels is nothing more than bridal jitters. The reception sparkles with laughter, champagne glasses clinking in celebration, and the dance floor crowded with relatives swaying to familiar songs. Everywhere, Claire turns, she sees admiration, friends admiring her gown, aunts praising David's devotion, children tossing petals with innocent delight. For a moment, she almost allows herself to sink into the illusion, the dream of a flawless beginning. Then, as she steps away to adjust her gown in the hallway, her world shifts. Just around the corner, hushed voices cut through the festive noise. She freezes, curiosity sparking when she recognizes David's voice, low and sharp, laced with irritation. His best man leans in close, words urgent, nearly swallowed by the clamor from the ballroom. You promised me this was buried. She can't find out. Claire's breath catches. Her pulse quickens as David hisses back something she can't fully catch. Only fragments, not today, and it ends here. The words hang heavy, charged with a secrecy that feels poisonous. She retreats before they notice her, her heart pounding as though she stumbled onto a crime scene instead of a conversation. When she returns to the reception, the champagne suddenly tastes bitter, the laughter around her hollow. Back at the head table, Claire smiles on command, lifting her glass for toasts, leaning into David's arm when cameras flash. To everyone else, she is still the blushing bride, glowing under fairy lights and love. But inside, she is unraveling. Her eyes betray her composure, darting toward David when he isn't looking. Each stolen glance feeds the gnawing question that has rooted itself deep within her. What could they be hiding from her? What truth is fragile enough to be cloaked in whispers even on their wedding day? The thought clings, refusing to loosen, no matter how many times she tells herself she is imagining things. The irony stings. On the very day she vowed forever, doubt has already slipped in like an uninvited guest. She watches David laugh with friends, his charm effortless, his smile disarming. But Claire feels the distance, a thin veil separating her from the man she thought she knew. She doesn't yet realize it, but the moment she overheard those words, the trajectory of her marriage changed. The seed of suspicion, planted in the glow of a picture-perfect wedding, is destined to grow, and it begins its quiet, relentless bloom that very night. Claire Anderson was never handed an easy life. Growing up in a fractured household, where arguments echoed louder than affection, she learned early that love could be conditional, and promises could be broken overnight. Her father left when she was only 12, and her mother, overwhelmed and bitter, spiraled into a cycle of unstable relationships. Claire became the caretaker for her younger siblings, for her mother when depression left her unable to get out of bed, and eventually for herself when she realized no one else could shield her from disappointment. Those formative years carved resilience into her bones, but they also left a quiet ache, the longing for stability. It was no surprise when she chose social work as her career, dedicating herself to protecting children who mirrored the girl she once was: alone, scared, desperate for safety. In every child's story, she saw pieces of her own. To Claire, marriage was not just romance, it was the anchor she never had growing up. When she met David Carter, steady, polished, seemingly unshakable, she believed she had finally found that anchor. His confidence reassured her, his success promised security, and his attention felt like the love she had craved all her life. To Claire, he represented not just a man, but a future that could rewrite her past. David Carter, to the outside world, was the embodiment of charm and success. He had the kind of smile that opened doors, a natural charisma that drew people in, and a career in business that seemed to rise effortlessly. His friends called him lucky, his colleagues, brilliant. But beneath the polished exterior, David carried shadows he never allowed anyone to see. Raised under the stern eye of Richard Carter, a man obsessed with reputation, power, and appearances, David learned that mistakes were not tolerated, only concealed. His childhood was not filled with affection but with expectation, and by adulthood, he had mastered the art of playing roles: the obedient son, the loyal friend, the devoted partner. What most didn't know was that his success was not as untarnished as it seemed. Behind the scenes lay mounting debts from reckless ventures, deals that teetered on the edge of legality, and betrayals hidden under a veneer of charm. And then there was Evelyn, the woman he had loved before Claire, a relationship that ended in heartbreak but never truly ended in his mind. Evelyn was a ghost that lingered in his decisions, a name he dared not speak yet could never forget. To David, marrying Claire was not only about love but about building the image he needed to sustain. She was kind, genuine, and unsullied by scandal, everything Evelyn wasn't, and everything his father demanded he present to the world. In Claire's corner stood Julia, her best friend since college, the kind of woman who saw through facades with razor-sharp instincts. Julia adored Claire's loyalty but never trusted David's perfection. Too polished, she once muttered over coffee, like glass that hides cracks. Claire laughed it off then, but Julia's words have begun to haunt her since the wedding. On David's side loomed Richard Carter, the patriarch who controlled his son's life like a chessboard. Richard viewed Claire less as a daughter-in-law and more as a strategic acquisition, ensuring David projected stability and respectability. Then there was Evelyn, a name Claire barely knew, but one that would later unravel the fragile balance of her marriage. For now, Evelyn was only a ghost in David's past, a whisper tucked neatly away, yet her presence remained a storm waiting to be unleashed. Together, these supporting figures orbit around Claire and David, each representing pressure, doubt, or a hidden truth. As Claire steps into married life, she feels torn between the picture-perfect dream she longed for and the unease tightening in her chest. Something isn't right, she senses it in David's evasive glances, in the conversations that stop when she enters the room, in the weight of secrets unspoken. What Claire doesn't yet realize is that the life she built on the promise of stability is already cracking. The vows they exchanged were supposed to bind them, but instead, they have tethered her to a truth she is not yet ready to face. It began as an ordinary evening. Claire wandered into David's home office, intending to leave a cup of coffee on his desk as a small gesture of affection. The room was immaculately organized, much like David himself: neat files, polished wood, and no sign of disorder. Yet as she leaned down to place the mug, her eye caught something unusual: a drawer, slightly ajar. At first, she thought nothing of it. But curiosity tugged at her when she noticed the faint glimmer of a phone screen tucked between folders. David already had a phone he carried everywhere, the one he guarded closely, the one he never let out of his sight. Why would he need another? Slowly, almost against her better judgment, Claire pulled the device out. The phone unlocked without a password, as though David never expected anyone else to touch it. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through the messages, her breath growing shallow. There, between banal exchanges and coded words, was a name that stabbed her gut: Evelyn. At first, Claire tried to tell herself it was old, a relic of the past. But the dates betrayed her. The messages were recent, during their engagement, during their honeymoon planning, even days before the wedding. And then she saw it, the line that turned her blood cold: "She'll never know. Our secret dies with us." That night, Claire confronted David with the phone clutched in her shaking hands. Her voice wavered between fury and heartbreak as she demanded an explanation. For a flicker of a moment, she saw it in his eyes: the truth, the guilt. But almost instantly, David's mask returned, his tone calm, calculated, the same charm that had always disarmed her. "Claire, you're imagining things," he said softly, stepping toward her like a man soothing a frightened child. "Those messages are old. You're being paranoid." He reached for her hand, but she pulled back. He sighed, feigning hurt. "Don't ruin what we have over nothing." His words were like a knife wrapped in silk, dismissing her pain while twisting her confusion deeper. Claire, who had built her entire life on truth and resilience, suddenly felt unsteady. She wanted to scream that she wasn't imagining it, that the dates proved everything, but David's unwavering calm made her question herself. Was she overreacting? Had she misunderstood? He leaned closer, his voice a whisper that carried both reassurance and threat. "If you keep doubting me, this marriage won't last." It was gaslighting in its purest form, making her distrust her own eyes, her own instincts, until she felt as though the ground itself was betraying her. When the confrontation ended, nothing felt resolved. David kissed her forehead as if the matter were closed, then walked away, leaving Claire standing in the silence of their too-perfect home. Her body trembled, but it was not just from anger, it was from the terrifying realization that her reality was being rewritten by the very man she trusted most. Though he had dismissed her fears, the words from Evelyn's message echoed louder than ever. "She'll never know. Our secret dies with us." Claire knew what she had read. She knew what she felt. And no matter how convincingly David smiled, no matter how tenderly he touched her hand, doubt had already lodged itself into her heart. It was a quiet, corrosive seed, one that would grow each time he looked at her with those steady eyes, each time he reassured her that everything was fine. She could still play the role of the devoted wife, smiling in public, clinking champagne glasses, wearing her wedding ring like armor, but inside, the fracture had begun. This was supposed to be the start of her forever, yet already she stood on broken ground. The marriage, barely begun, was cracking beneath the weight of lies, and Claire, though unsure of the full truth, could no longer silence the whisper that had haunted her since the wedding day. Sometimes, the people we trust most are the ones we know the least. In the weeks that followed, Claire forced herself to play the role of the newlywed bride. She smiled during dinners with friends, held David's hand at family gatherings, and even kissed him goodbye in the mornings with a tenderness that felt increasingly hollow. But beneath that mask, her eyes were wide open. She noticed everything now, the late meetings that stretched longer than they should, the phone calls that ended abruptly when she walked into the room, the drawers in his office that were suddenly locked when they had never been before. Each inconsistency became a thread she tugged at, unraveling the careful fabric of their life together. At night, when David fell asleep easily beside her, Claire lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment with a sharper lens. Were those smiles real, or rehearsed? Did his warmth mean love, or guilt? Julia's voice echoed in her mind, secrets like his don't stay buried. It was no longer just doubt. It was vigilance, an exhausting awareness that left her drained yet unable to stop. To everyone else, they looked like the perfect couple. But Claire knew better. She could feel the fracture widening, a quiet tremor in the foundation of her marriage, and no matter how much she wanted to cling to the dream, the truth gnawed at her in the shadows. Claire's emotional conflict became a battlefield no one else could see. She loved David, or at least the version of him she had fallen for. The man who had once made her laugh until her ribs ached, who held her through storms, who promised her safety when her world had always felt uncertain. But every tender memory now warred against the lies stacking up before her eyes. She wanted desperately to believe him, to cling to the notion that her instincts were wrong, that she was misreading everything. But the evidence mounted like weights pressing on her chest. Each hidden glance at his second phone, each whispered conversation behind closed doors, each unexplained absence, they weren't illusions. They were pieces of a puzzle forming a picture she was terrified to see. At times, she caught herself defending him in her own mind, repeating his words, "You're imagining things. You're paranoid." Yet the harder she tried to silence her intuition, the louder it grew. She felt torn between the man she wanted him to be and the man he was showing himself to be. And in that tension, Claire realized something devastating. Her love had become conditional, tangled in suspicion, and no marriage could survive love built on lies. The breaking point came when Claire stumbled upon the truth she could no longer deny. A stray email left open on David's office computer, a message marked urgent, "We need to talk about the baby." The name beneath it made her stomach lurch, Evelyn. For a long moment, Claire couldn't breathe, her eyes locked on those words as if the screen itself had betrayed her. The affair hadn't ended, it had evolved into something irreversible. Evelyn wasn't just a shadow from David's past, she was pregnant, and David might be the father. The revelation shattered the fragile hope Claire had clung to, sending her world spinning off its axis. She staggered back, nausea rising, her pulse thundering in her ears. Every whispered call, every late-night meeting, every secret drawer suddenly clicked into place with devastating clarity. And yet, even as her heart broke, she felt the cruel tug of denial. Could it be true? Could David really have built their marriage on such deception? When she confronted him, he evaded, deflected, weaving words meant to soothe and confuse. But nothing could erase what she had seen. The betrayal wasn't abstract anymore, it was flesh and blood, a future child, proof that their life together had been built on half-truths and silence. Claire's world tilted, and for the first time, she admitted to herself the most terrifying thought of all: she may have married a stranger. The truth came crashing down not in whispers but in the raw honesty of another woman's voice. Claire arranged to meet Evelyn in a quiet cafe, the kind of place where the hum of background conversations could shield secrets. She expected defensiveness, even hostility, but Evelyn arrived with weary eyes and a calmness that spoke of someone carrying a burden for far too long. "He promised me marriage," Evelyn confessed, her voice steady but edged with pain. "We were supposed to build a life together. But then he met you, and suddenly, I wasn't right anymore." Claire felt her stomach twist, each word carving into her like a blade. Evelyn leaned closer, bitterness seeping into her tone. "Do you know why he chose you? Because you're safe. Because you look perfect on his arm. You fit the image his father wanted: respectable, untouchable." The air in the cafe seemed to thin as Evelyn delivered the final blow. The pregnancy wasn't speculation. It was real. And David knew. He had known all along. Claire sat frozen, her hands trembling around her untouched cup, her world rearranging itself with every sentence Evelyn spoke. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was strategic, calculated. For the first time, Claire realized she had never been loved for who she was. She had been selected, like a piece on a chessboard, useful only because she completed David's illusion of perfection. The door to the cafe slammed open as if on cue, and David appeared, fury radiating from him like heat. His eyes, usually charming and disarming, now burned with unfiltered rage. "So this is what you've been doing," he snapped, glaring at Claire as though she had committed the betrayal. "Digging into my life, conspiring against me with her?" He jabbed a finger toward Evelyn, who rolled her eyes but said nothing. Claire stood, her voice unsteady but determined. "You lied to me. About her, about everything." David's laugh was cold, mocking. "You're obsessed, Claire. You've destroyed us with your paranoia. If you had just trusted me, none of this would have mattered." His words fell like hammers, each designed to crush her confidence, to shift the blame from him onto her shoulders. It was the same tactic he had used since the first time she confronted him: deny, deflect, accuse. But this time, the stakes were higher, the lies too tangled to unravel with charm alone. Evelyn, arms crossed, cut through his performance with a bitter laugh. "She's not paranoid, David. She's finally seeing you for what you are." The cafe seemed to close in around them, a stage where the facade of David's perfect life was crumbling in front of the one person he could never fully control, Claire. For the first time, she didn't feel crazy. She felt awake. Just when Claire thought she had absorbed the worst of his betrayals, Evelyn delivered one final revelation that made her blood run cold. "Ask him about the company," she said, her tone sharp. Claire turned toward David, whose composure cracked for the first time, a flicker of panic crossing his face. Evelyn leaned in, her voice laced with venom. "He's been committing fraud deals, fake accounts, money funneled through places you wouldn't believe. And guess whose name is on half the paperwork?" Claire's breath hitched. She shook her head instinctively, but Evelyn didn't falter. "Yours, Claire. He's been using you as his shield. His perfect wife, the spotless social worker, who would ever suspect her?" The room seemed to tilt as the pieces aligned in Claire's mind. The locked drawers. The documents she had signed without reading because David had insisted they were routine. The sudden insistence that she be involved in certain accounts, smiling for photos at his company events. It wasn't love, it was a cover. She wasn't just betrayed, she was implicated. David, sensing her horror, tried to regain control. "Don't listen to her. She's jealous, she wants to ruin us." But his words were thinner now, the cracks in his armor exposed. Claire's heart pounded as she realized the truth. She hadn't just married a liar. She had married a man capable of destroying her life, legally and emotionally, while convincing her it was all in her head. The marriage wasn't just broken. It was a trap that I end the days after the confrontation. Claire moved through her life like a ghost, hollow, exhausted, but with a strange fire smoldering beneath the wreckage of her heartbreak. For the first time, she stopped asking why David had betrayed her and started asking how she could protect herself. Julia was the one who gave her the first push, sitting across from her in their favorite diner, her hand firm on Claire's trembling fingers. "He's not just a liar, Claire. He's dangerous. You need to fight back." Those words became her anchor. With Julia's unwavering support, Claire quietly hired a lawyer, a sharp-minded woman who listened without judgment and whose calm assurance steadied Claire's spiraling fear. From that moment, every locked drawer, every financial document, every password David thought she couldn't guess became potential evidence. Claire began living a double life, the outwardly dutiful wife at public events, and the silent investigator in the shadows. The fear never left her, but it was no longer paralyzing, it was fuel. For once, she was no longer clinging to the fantasy of saving her marriage. She was building the foundation of saving herself. As Claire worked quietly, David's carefully polished image began to show fractures. Small at first, a rumor whispered at a business dinner, a colleague's sudden unease when Claire appeared, documents misplaced at the firm. The whispers grew into shadows that followed him everywhere, eroding the confidence he wore like armor. Evelyn, once his secret and his weapon, became his undoing. Fed up with being used and discarded, she reached out to Claire, her tone sharp but her intent surprisingly sincere. "I'm done protecting him. He doesn't deserve loyalty from either of us." With Evelyn's cooperation, Claire obtained crucial evidence, financial records, correspondences, timelines that proved David's fraud wasn't speculation but fact. Together, the two women formed an unlikely alliance, bonded not by friendship but by survival, both wounded by the same man in different ways. Claire realized she wasn't just escaping anymore, she was dismantling the very empire David had built on deception. Each file she added to her lawyer's folder, each lie she unraveled, was another brick pulled from the foundation of David's false life. The man who once controlled her with charm and gaslighting was losing control, piece by piece, as the truth sharpened into a weapon Claire now wielded. When the moment came, it wasn't in a dim cafe or a whispered argument, but under the stark lights of a boardroom that felt more like a courtroom. Claire sat at one end of the long table, her lawyer beside her, evidence neatly stacked like ammunition. David, still clinging to his arrogance, smirked across from her as though the performance could still sway her. But as the documents unfolded, forged signatures, fraudulent transfers, her name appearing where it should never have been, the smirk faltered. His voice, once steady and commanding, rose in pitch, tinged with panic. "This is nonsense. She's trying to destroy me." But this time, no one believed him. Claire's lawyer spoke with precision, dismantling every excuse until David's silence became the only answer. Evelyn's testimony landed the final blow, her words cool and damning. "He thought he could own us both. But we're not his pawns anymore." For the first time, Claire looked at David without fear or longing. He was no longer her husband, no longer her anchor or her captor. He was simply a man exposed. In that moment, Claire felt something she hadn't in months: freedom. She had not only cleared her name but reclaimed her life. Walking out of that room, the weight on her shoulders lifted, she knew the war wasn't just about surviving betrayal. It was about proving to herself that she was stronger than the lies that tried to bury her. And she had won. The courtroom was quieter than Claire expected the day she signed the divorce papers. No shouting, no theatrics, just the scratch of her pen across the dotted line, the final mark severing her from David Carter. It was surreal how something so binding could end with nothing more than ink and paper. As she slid the folder back to her lawyer, she felt her chest loosen, as if invisible chains had finally fallen away. There was grief, yes, but not for the marriage itself. She grieved the illusion, the years she had invested in believing that safety could be found in someone else's shadow. Later that afternoon, Claire carried her wedding dress to a small charity boutique downtown. The gown, once a symbol of her dreams, hung weightless in her arms, now an empty promise. She smoothed the satin one last time, remembering the flicker of doubt in her heart on the day she wore it. Then she slipped a folded note into the box with the dress. "May this dress bring someone joy, not chains." Handing it over to the shopkeeper, she walked away without looking back. It wasn't just a donation, it was a release. A closing of one chapter, and the tentative opening of another. In her small new apartment, sunlight spilled across second-hand furniture, casting the space in a glow that felt more like freedom than lack. Claire sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee warming her hands, her journal open before her. The pages were filled with raw entries, moments of anger, fragments of fear, but also affirmations of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She turned to a fresh page, inhaled deeply, and wrote the words that had crystallized from her journey. "Love built on lies is no love at all. I chose me, and that saved my life." She lingered on the sentence, her pen tracing it slowly, savoring the truth it carried. For the first time in years, she didn't feel defined by betrayal or brokenness. She felt whole, self-made, her worth no longer tethered to someone else's validation. The silence of the apartment was not loneliness but peace. She sipped her coffee, looking out at the city skyline, and allowed herself a small smile. Healing wasn't instant, the scars would remain, but they no longer defined her. They reminded her instead of the battles she had fought and survived. Months later, Claire walked through the glass doors of her new office, a space she had fought to create with every ounce of her strength. The plaque on the wall read, "Center for Women's Renewal, a counseling service for women escaping toxic marriages and abusive relationships." Claire had taken her pain and transformed it into purpose, determined that no one else would feel as alone as she once had. As she greeted her first client, she felt a quiet, unshakable certainty settle over her. This was more than a job, it was her calling. She had walked through fire and emerged not only unburned but stronger, tempered by survival. When she glanced at her reflection in the office window, she barely recognized the woman staring back, not the fragile bride clinging to illusions, but a woman who had reclaimed her voice, her power, her life. As she stepped into her office, files in hand, a quiet sense of triumph pulsed through her. She was free. She was whole. And as the door closed behind her, the final image was not of what she had lost, but of what she had built, a life grounded in truth, in courage, and in the unshakable choice to stand for herself. Claire Anderson was no longer a victim of betrayal. She was a survivor, and more than that, she was a guide for others to find their way out of the dark.